But before I get into quoting Jeff Lebby, what were some things that maybe you were able to hear from him and some players that stood out to you this past week as we dive into the season?
Yeah, I think on the offensive side of the ball, I mentioned earlier, there's a confidence that they are going to take a considerable step forward there. And, when Jeff Lebby was hired, that hire ultimately happened because of his offensive pedigree. That's a guy that everywhere he had been, obviously he was on the staff of those Baylor teams several years ago when they were putting up 600 yards a game and doing things no one else had really seen in football at the time. Goes to UC, eventually gets to UCF, has a great role, becomes an offensive coordinator there under Josh Heupel, and they put up a ton of numbers. Goes to Ole Miss, does the same thing and help turn things around there with Lane Kiffin. It goes to Oklahoma, and you see it. The offense immediately everywhere he had been, they'd been able to step in and put up big numbers and be an offense that right away, year one, they gave you a chance to be competitive. And I think the expectation last year was State's going to get that. Jeff Lebby's done it everywhere he's been. The offense right away, they're going to step in and be able to move the ball, put points on the board. You didn't fully get it last year. And a lot of that is because of the struggles up front. And that was one of the big takeaways. They feel they have really improved that offensive line because that was a big concern for them a year ago. There was several points in the season. Run blocking was just not there. Pass protection was horrible the entire year. So that's something that was a major concern or a major question mark going into the offseason that they had to address. I think the hope now is because of some of the stuff on the offensive line, and I guess we can hit there first. They went and brought in 5 transfers in the spring window after everything was wrapped up, which you typically don't see. And I think on one hand, you see that, and that's a little bit of a concern. And look, Jeff Lebby said day one of spring practices, we are not where we're supposed to be on the offensive line. He came out spring practices before they had even – the first time he met with media and talked about O-line is not where it needs to be. We are going to be aggressive in the spring. They were aggressive in the spring. And they brought some guys in that they are now confident because Lebby was asked directly, like, okay, you said this at the start of spring. What are you thinking now that we're going into fall camp? He's like, yeah, we've improved that room. And one of the comments he made is we've brought in some guys that will allow us to take some players who had been playing tackle and move them to guard. And I think that getting specific about that, I does think gives me some confidence that you're saying like, hey, it's not even just, oh yeah, we got more depth in the room, because they do. They have more depth in the room. You're literally coming out and saying like, we're adding these guys and that's going to let us move guys to where they can play better. So I think one of the big additions, Blake Steen coming in from Virginia, that's a guy who was a starting right tackle for the Cavaliers last season and was one of the better portal offensive linemen available at the end of this when you get into the spring window. I think the expectation is he's going to come in and be a starter for Mississippi State at one of those tackle spots. And a guy like Albert Reese, who was playing tackle for State a year ago, but really should be playing guard, you can potentially move him inside. And you get someone, Reese, who has experience and has been there, but now you'd be able to put him in a place where he's more comfortable and let Steen take a tackle spot. Zach Owens, transfer from Colorado, is someone that Blake Shapen shouted out in another interview. It's just like, man, this is a massive human being. And like they got being able to bring that in the room. That was a big thing, is getting bigger bodies in the room. They had to do that. So I think the O-line is going to take a step forward. They've given themselves a lot of options. I don't know how many people follow Clint Lamb on Twitter, but he covers Alabama, but he's been doing some Mississippi State work this offseason, and he put out like a great look at like all of the offensive line combinations Mississippi State has available to them this year with the bodies coming in. And they could
and
go.
that's a big thing. That's a big thing among a lot of SEC teams too. And sorry to cut you off there too, by the way.
Oh,
I was going to mention though, before I forget, don't forget that they brought in a new offensive line coach and Phil Loadholt from Colorado. They also brought in from Colorado Vincent Daney or
Vincent
Dancy.
Yancey,
Yep.
defensive ends and outside
So
linebacker.
I think that's what's interesting too, is not only are you mentioning they built up the line, they built up the coaching staff for it too. So it's gonna, hopefully, fingers crossed, that it has a whole new look, but even a better look.
Loadholt was a big addition, and that's someone who has a lot of familiarity with Jeff Lebby. Lebby was a student assistant at Oklahoma when Loadholt was a player there. They've been together at a few coaching stops in recent years. He was with him at UCF. He was with him at Ole Miss, not at Ole Miss, at Oklahoma as an offensive analyst. So he's got comfort within the system. He knows how this offense is supposed to look. He knows what is expected of that O-line room. And he did a pretty good job at Colorado last year. I know all the narrative because we just had the Shedeur Sanders, all the draft saga with that. And every time we talked about Shedeur in the draft, all that could be talked about was, oh man, well, his offensive line was terrible. And look, it wasn't a good offensive line, but year 1 to year 2 for Shedeur, and they changed offensive line coaches with Lode Holt coming in his second season, that O-line got better. And I do think it's telling that Colorado fans, when Lode Holt was announced to be going to Mississippi State, the reaction from a lot of them is, dang, that guy was doing a good job. We don't want to lose him. And he is in a short time at Mississippi State. You've seen some of the recruiting acumen that he has, being able to bring in 5 transfers in the spring window and get this room to where you want it to be. So that's a huge addition for them. I think they're going to be better coached up front. They've got more depth. They have, in theory, better talent. I think that group takes a step forward, and that's just going to help everything on the offense. And I think we can kind of get into Blake Shapen in year 2. That's a big thing for him, being protected up front. When you're talking about a guy coming off of injury, you need to make sure you're keeping him upright. He was under pressure a lot last season in those 4 games that he played. Toledo harassed him. That should not be happening when you're talking about you're an SEC team and you've got a good MAC school, but a MAC school just getting after him all night long. That's something they've ideally improved upon, and that's going to be really big for this team going into the next year.